Hi, Jeffrey. Hi, Janelle. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. I'm just looking over the question board here. Thanks for joining a few minutes early. Hi, Jillian.
I went old school with a thumbs up there.
Nice. I love it.
By the time I figure out how to use the React button, forget it.
This I have a Mac and sometimes it reads the yeah, I don't know if you see that. Yeah. I forget all the gestures, but sometimes it'll pop up. Hello, Jaime.
I'm on a 2016 Windows Dell that's on its last legs.
26.
No, it's on its last legs.
About time for an upgrade, huh?
Time to take it out back and shoot it. Sorry, it's an old farmer's
No
race.
worries. I live in if you're familiar, I live in Heber City, Utah, which is surrounded by
Mm,
farms.
yeah,
Farms that are quickly being developed. Um, yeah, and I'm partially to blame here because we just moved into a place here 2 years ago that was used to be, yeah, it just used to be fields.
yeah.
Hey, David.
Read something about they're hoping up to open up some more federal lands for that exact purpose.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So we'll just give everyone a minute to join in here. There's a link to the question board in the chat. In the Zoom chat, feel free to drop a question in there or just upvote. The coloring, I colored two of them that I thought were interesting that haven't really been answered or posed before. These questions haven't been posed before. That's why you'll see what color is that? Aquamarine. Hey John, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Liza, how are you? It's so awesome to see the same faces over and over. It's awesome in a I love to see you guys here, but I also know that if you're here maybe you're not making as much traction. So I don't know what to make of it. Either way, I'm happy you guys are here.
No, making traction, well, at least I can speak for myself, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's good to always, the more interviews you have, the better, then there's still questions out there and also,
Yeah.
uh, oh, maybe there is something else that, Eric would say that could be helpful. Why not?
I
And you have such a
feel like I'm
sunny
yeah.
disposition.
I appreciate that. I feel like I'm reaching the limits of my little knowledge base in my head here when it comes to recruiting. All right, well, let's just jump in. Hi Kayla. So folks that haven't been here before, I do this every week. I spend about half an hour, 45 minutes just trying to shine a light on the recruiting, interview, hiring process, and really with the premise that a little bit of information goes a long way in terms of understanding that process as a job seeker. And so I think a lot of you folks are coming from the Never Search Alone community. I was a moderator over the past year for two job search councils, and I'm familiar with the playbook. And anyway, I know it's tough to get time with a recruiter. And so I hold these to kind of, again, sort of give back to the community. Um, I don't have all the answers, but I try to answer the questions the best I can, particularly from the perspective of a recruiter mindset, right? So I might not have the answer, but I have an answer by giving you my perspective as a recruiter. So let's just go through this. There is a question board. Again, I set this up as sort of an AMA. Last week we did a sort of a special guest with John, who's here today as well. Sort of tapping his brain as far as his experience in HR. Um, but there is a link in the chat box there if you want to jump in there and look at the question board. I'm just going to go from the top, the questions that have been upvoted the most, starting with I see 4 upvotes, and then just go down the line. If you guys have any questions, drop it in here or just drop it into the chat, and we could just do it old school if you want to raise your hand and we could talk about it. So, all right. What is your advice in attempting to get feedback from interviewers? I've been unable to get any for months. Um, yeah, I think I've answered this in some form or fashion in the past. Getting feedback from interviewers it can be tough for several reasons. One is they tend to be pretty busy, especially now. There's a lot of companies that they reduced their headcount as far as a lot of folks, but that includes recruiters. So you'll often find recruiters doing the job of one or two, maybe more recruiters. So they're the point is that they're increasingly busy. The other thing too is that recruiters they don't they don't have it, there's sort of a cost benefit for them, right? The cost of giving you feedback sort of exposes them and the company potentially to sort of potentially in a worst case like legal backlash. So depending on the company, they may play it safe, and the benefit of providing feedback, most recruiters don't see sort of an immediate benefit, right? So that may be some of the sort of the dynamics at play there if you're attempting to get feedback from interviewers, particularly if you've been passed on, right? My advice would be to try to get feedback throughout the process, and be that person that if you signal, again, speaking from my own experience, I'm more apt to give feedback to a candidate that I know has been transparent with me and has spoke quite openly and transparently with me. And somebody that I know, I've come to know through my experience with the person that they're humble, they have a growth mindset, and if I were to give them feedback, that they would take it like in a very positive way, right? And that's something that gets demonstrated over time, throughout the interview process. So I'm more apt to give feedback to that person that demonstrates that. I would ask for feedback throughout the process. Don't just wait till the end, if you've been passed on. Hey, what's the feedback, right? It's something that I would do throughout the process, right? I mean, you could even do that as early as the first conversation with the recruiter, and ask them for feedback about how they perceive your candidacy, right? Where they feel you might be a good fit, or where they might feel like there might be a gap, right? And so I would start asking for feedback and signaling that them providing you feedback is in the best interest of everyone, right? So,
Eric,
yep.
I would agree with you 100%. It's unlikely you're ever going to get feedback from any kind of recruitment process. Maybe through a search firm that ends up getting some feedback, but first it's liability, and sometimes it's really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
It's a close call, and sometimes they'll say it's hard to really give you specific feedback on why one versus the other. But I like Eric's comment about with the first initial meeting with HR or recruiter. I would ask, is there anything that you think I should highlight in my background that would be important as I go through this process? Or there's anything that you think I should clarify as I go through this, as you see me as a candidate? That always puts you in a better position, and you're almost getting feedback there
Yeah.
of what type of fit they see. And it's more proactive, and it puts you in a better position to go through the interviewing process. So
Yeah.
I would think about that.
Yeah, really closing the feedback loop, right? Don't wait, whatever, 4 weeks to
Yeah.
complete the interview cycle before you seek feedback, right? The other thing too is that, when somebody solicits feedback as early as the first call as a recruiter, and I offer them some feedback, it's almost a sort of a test, right? In some ways, it's sort of a test. Like whatever feedback I provide them, I can see over time to what extent they've taken that feedback, internalized it, and actually did something with it, and that's really important. Because sometimes people just ask for feedback for face value, or they're just going through the motions, right? And so I tend to be perceptive of that. And so again, there's all kinds of different kinds of recruiters out there, but if you close the feedback, if you create a sort of a mini feedback loop throughout the process and early on, yeah, I think it'll give you a better chance to get to understand how others are perceiving you and how to maneuver.
Yeah.
So
Remember, the goal of the internal recruiter is to get as many good quality candidates in front of the hiring manager as possible. So if they could help you do better, it puts them in a the best position to be as an internal recruiter is to have three really great candidates that the manager has a hard time making a decision, who do I want to select? That makes you look like a superstar. And so if
yeah.
you can help the recruiter make you a better candidate through the process, it only helps them. So I would be surprised if they would be reluctant to help you if you ask them that question.
I just want to add that I really like that, and I've been asking like in the early calls with recruiters this question. I mean, I didn't get anything, well, negative something or something I would change, but it did give me a sense of how they perceive me. Like, and so that is also kind of certain type of feedback or something that could tell me like how I can position me and myself in the conversations. Because it's all like overall, but
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you worked in a really large company and then you're a founder. Like, this is really great. It shows this and that. And I'm like, okay, all right. So that's like something I can use generally. It just tells me like how like it didn't necessarily, I think that people thought that way, but yeah, it just gives some feedback.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've actually had success, like I think you were saying, Eric, outside recruiters, because their incentives are a little bit different in terms of making sure they're calibrating as they go along. Because if it's in the first week of the job search, they're testing out the number of candidates they're giving, hiring inside recruiters giving feedback or whatever. And so they've been more apt to give some feedback when, let's say, you've been declined, let's say, and they might be interesting at that point because they're getting active feedback both from the company, so that the next set of searches are a little bit more refined.
Yeah. Yeah. And you might be more likely to get feedback from an external recruiter than you would from an internal recruiter. Because external recruiters, they're more often than not working with multiple clients or different clients. And so if you're not a fit, for example, with one of their clients, you might be a fit for another client, right? And so they might be more apt to give you feedback. I would be as an external recruiter because I want to build a sort of a longer term relationship with that candidate. And so yeah. Um, oh, I see quite a few questions here, Rohit. So, anything you can share about internal recruiters using LinkedIn and or career websites and handling hundreds of resume? What are the typical filters? Um,
So I guess what I'm reacting to is I'm sure everybody's seeing that there's a n number of applicants per given job opportunity that's out there, given a certain discipline. And so now I'm guessing the filtering process is a bit more either involved or not involved. So just curious from anybody who's got experience in this is what techniques do you use? Because at some point you can make a cutoff and say everybody below this don't have time to look at, right? So what would be the mechanisms that are being used per se?
so, just to give a little bit of background in terms of my experience, in terms of how I've seen. So typically, what happens, right? You have a recruiter, whether internal or external, and they're overseeing any number of job requisitions or positions or job postings, you can say. And so for each job posting, they'll have a funnel of candidates. And right now, we're seeing a lot of these funnels sort of being inundated with, hundreds of resumes, hundreds of applicants. And so typically what happens is the recruiter will just sort of cycle through these requisitions, letting them batch up over time, and then they'll go and process them. Process them meaning they'll usually look through the stack. If they do look through the stack, some people are cynical about it and say, "Oh, but nobody's even looked through the stacks." If they're looking through the stack, they'll usually look through it with an eye of like elimination, right? To get how do you get that stack of 500 down to 50? So they'll just look for any excuse to exclude you, right? If you don't fit the mold, if you don't fit, their model or their pattern of what they are thinking of for the ideal profile for a candidate, they'll just exclude you, right? And then once they get it down, let's just say using numbers like 500 down to 50, then they'll take another pass looking at you. So they tend to go, I mean, because of the just sheer number of volume, they'll tend to go through these sort of cohorts or batches. And then once they get it down to, something that's more manageable, they'll set up a time, usually to do a screening interview with, a handful of folks. And then from there, they'll start to build a cohort that they'll start to shepherd through the process. Meanwhile, the stack is probably, if they didn't close the position, like on, let's say, for example, on LinkedIn or Indeed, they'll continue to get more applicants. And meanwhile, they're already moving forward with a cohort. And so, and just by sheer volume, what this means is that time is of the essence. If a position is posted, you want to be, earlier on so you can get scooped up as part of that first cohort. Because once you have a cohort going through, the chances of you getting fast tracked from the top of the funnel are probably slimmer. They're slimmer, right? So that cohort goes through, let's just say it's 5 people that get submitted to the hiring manager. Hiring manager says, "Oh, I want to interview these 3." They get scheduled, they get moved along. And just hypothetically, let's just say 2 make it through the process and 2 get an offer. Um, you know, or one gets an offer, let's say that one rejects or they decline, and then the other person gets an offer and they accept, then they're good to go. If the 2 decline, then usually an astute recruiter will get signals of that earlier on, and they'll go back and start building another cohort. So that's just kind of how the dynamic works, especially with the sheer volume. So time is of the essence. What I recommend is just, if you see jobs that are interesting to you, try to apply sooner rather than later. And if you've seen a job that's been posted for weeks, it's probably a bit stale. So I wouldn't expect too much in terms of applying at that point.
Yeah, I think
I gotta say though, I mean, in my limited experience, and the caveat that I'm applying to startups on average Series B and C, right? So not a huge, but everybody gets like on LinkedIn it always says 100 plus applicants, whatever.
Yeah, they changed that not too long ago.
Oh yeah, so not to like shock people
Yeah.
so but I've seen that. I mean, I don't apply cold ever. And I've had good traction into getting somebody in the company. It's not big enough companies, right? And I had several times in the last couple, well, it's been recent, where the position is taken, like it says, not accepting applications, and they very much they may be actually completely rewriting the job description. They're very much interviewing. They like somebody was already they rejected me. I sent another person from NeverSearch along. They just put her in. Like the position said it was closed for like a couple of weeks.
And they
Um,
reopened it?
well, they didn't. They didn't close it internally. They just closed the applications, right?
Yeah.
Or like several times they probably maybe I don't know like on based on what like like rewriting positions. So several times I thought like well I mean I already networked my way in, I'm just gonna ask anyways. And the position they're very much hiring for those roles. So it's
Yeah.
if you have an in, if you have somebody to in the company, still ask.
It's
Chances are.
always better to go. I mean, you have to do a multi-pronged approach, right? And what you might be seeing there, Liza, is just indicative of maybe they are just refining or calibrating the job description for the search.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot for companies that are hiring for a position for the first time, or they're relatively new to hiring a particular position. Yeah, you'll kind of see that.
just, yeah, just remember, I know it's nobody on this call, but we get resumes that are nowhere even close, and we get hundreds of them. And we're in the age of easy applying.
Yeah.
So I'm not making excuses for recruiters, but just on their end. So at times they're getting hundreds of resumes from people all over the world that are not even close to anywhere near the description. And
Yeah.
so they have to go through this process of trying to weed out people that in essence are wasting their time.
Yeah.
And so what Eric had said was right. I mean, I usually had 3 piles, and it would be, here's a close match, here's maybe, and here's like not even, anywhere near what I'm looking for. And then that would, and sometimes I would stop the job just to stop the influx of resumes coming in,
Yeah.
because there's so many, resumes that came in that people didn't take the time or care of reading the description or thinking, am I even close to this? So that's part of the reasons why sometimes these get shut and they're really not closed, just because it clogs up your inbox or your ATS, and there's more that you have to go through that most of the time isn't really clear. But Eric's advice on go early is yes, as soon as you see it or put alerts up, on certain jobs. As soon as you see it, get it in, because it will get to that point where there'll be so many that a lot of recruiters will stop looking. Like I have 20 resumes that are pretty close. So I have, I would look at the clock or the counter as resumes would come in. And when I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I have 100, 150, whatever it might be, I could stop it, or I'll even leave it open, but I'm going to go through my process of, selecting. And it's almost, even though they're coming in, I'm not paying attention because I have a really good pool that I can go with. So
Yeah.
do the,
And I
Hey,
want
one follow-up on that. So now, obviously, as you said, in this age of easy apply, there are two mechanisms to get your resume in. You either use the LinkedIn uh, process, or you track down the company, go to the career website, and submit through there. So I'd be curious if you guys differentiate your approach to assessing resumes. Like, I don't know if the things that you submit on LinkedIn make it all the way to the ATS, or you have to log into LinkedIn Recruiter to review those versus the ones go directly from your career website. Any background insight there? I've always wanted to see what the other side looks like.
Yeah, it depends on the ATS. I mean, some ATS integrate with LinkedIn, but almost guaranteed they're going to get an email,
Okay.
right? So through LinkedIn Recruiter, you'll have like you have an inbox in LinkedIn Recruiter, and so they'll get notified as well. But then you can also configure it to send you an email, which is
Okay.
on by default, if I recall.
yeah. So I had an ATS that it posted it out on different sites. So it did LinkedIn and Indeed and all of those others, and it just aggregated everything together. So I didn't really even know which it came through. I think a
I see.
lot are going towards that type of. So
Okay.
I think the short answer is I don't know if it's going to make a significant difference one way or the other.
Okay.
And I want to,
Great.
I mean, I know you guys are recruiters, but again, just sharing what it seems to be working for me. For anyone, again, who is applying of startups that are not too big, so under like 200-300 people, if you can find your way to just get connected to the CEO. Like every time I get like my resume directly to the CEO, like I get an interview. Like, because I think all they do, they probably just send it to whoever the hiring manager is without even looking at it. But if the email comes from CEO and says, "Look at this resume,"
Yeah.
it's happened to me several times, and I haven't applied to that many jobs. And you get a resume same day, easy. Well, not like you're not going to be talking to them same day, but you're going to get a response same day. It just
Yeah.
works really well, and it's not that hard to actually get that introduction, or maybe even cold email the CEO if you like, can position yourself. I haven't done cold emails.
Yeah. Anybody with influence at the company, it could be C-level. I mean, ideally, if you get an endorsement, or not even endorsement, but just like you
Yeah,
said, if they'll just forward it on, you're almost guaranteed that whoever he or she's sending it to, they're gonna look at it and they'll
yeah,
probably give you more love than just coming into the front door, right?
yeah. So yeah,
So
if you can do that, like it just makes it think like you're gonna be looked at, and if you're like if you, I mean, obviously only do that if you think it's the right position, but um.
yeah. Let's see. As a recruiter, what questions you wish potential candidates ask you? Okay, that's a unique question. I get the questions I get a lot of are, you know, um, it, every now and then I'll get, what is the process like? What do I like about working there? What do I know about the interviewer, the recruiting process? I get those fairly often. Um,
Can I add?
yeah, go for it.
So do your research on the company and get thoughtful questions about either the history of the company, where they are today, what they're working on in the future, what's the prospects of things happening in their product line or their marketplace. Do your research and show that you took the time and cared about going on the interview, and then try to even maybe find out what's happening with people in the organization, if they're in the news or something like that in the department or overall that they're doing. The more time that you show interest in the job and the company, that you just didn't kind of show up. And listen, you can ask all these questions about timing and process and all of that. But to me, if someone really showed a lot of interest of, they really like the company, they're interested in the role and took the time to be knowledgeable about it and ask me questions that aren't obvious that they may want to know, to me, carried a lot of weight.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the questions that really stick out to me are like you said, the ones that can't be really answered by looking at the website, at the company website. And if they know something about the company or something that's going on that I don't know, that I learned something from, maybe it's a current event, right? Those are the things that leave an impression on me as a recruiter. Yeah. Um, let's see if I pass this one. If there are gaps on your resume, what's the best way to address? As a recruiter, if I see a gap, it's whether the person's trying to obscure it on on their LinkedIn profile or their resume, or they're pretty pronounced about it. Um, it's something that draws my attention because I'm really curious about what the nature of the gap is, right? Did they end up trying to just take some time off? Were they let go? Were they considering a career change? What were they doing during the time? And so it becomes a real area of interest for me as a recruiter to kind of explore that. And so I guess one thought is that I wouldn't try to obscure it or hide it per se, because most recruiters will be sort of zeroing in on that anyway, right? If they see, just by the just doing the math on the dates there, right? They'll zero in on there and they'll kind of inquire on what's going on there. And so my recommendation would be to just have a narrative there that sort of describes what you were doing, why you were doing it, and ultimately tying that back to why that time spent would make you a strong consideration for the position that you're discussing. Um, would accepting a job offer for a role that deviates from your current career have an impact on your future chance at pivoting back into product management? I mean, the thing in my experience about product management, product management, people come from all kinds of different backgrounds. Before it used to be, particularly in tech, it used to be mostly folks coming from a or from a technical background. But nowadays, like people like PMs come from all kinds of different walks of life, right? They've come from sales, from customer support, um, you know, uh, client success, obviously from the engineering or technical side. So I think the thing about being a PM is that the more sort of diverse perspective you have, it can make you a better product manager, right? So that's how I would spin it, in terms of taking a role that might not be in a formal product management role. Whatever position you're taking, ideally will help sort of extend give you a different perspective, right? And so you can tie that into if you need to pivot back into product. That's my thought there. Um, how important is it to list your experience in date order? For example, if the job before my last job shows more applicable qualifications for the role, can I put that at the top of my resume? One thing I would suggest, again, as a person that reads a lot of resumes, is having a section up top that sort of, the describes your candidate market fit statement, to use the NSA lingo. And also what I like to see is like a few bullet points at the very top, even before going into your work experience, that are just sort of marquee accomplishments that gives the reader, me, a sense of the breadth and depth of your accomplishments. And so that would be an interesting place to put that. So, I mean, if you're talking about maybe downplaying or obscuring your more recent job because it doesn't have as many relevant accomplishments or work experience, um, I mean, you could try doing that, but again, going to the top is kind of where I go first when I'm looking for that kind of experience.
Yeah, I would to add to that, the more confusing you make your resume, the harder it is for the recruiter and the more frustrated they could get with it. So stick with the
Yeah.
format, but I like Eric's comment about highlight your skill sets, and there's keywords at the top that generally would look, and we look for more keywords about what's relevant to the job, and that makes it easier. But I know some have gone with some really crazy formats where there's no dates, or you just only do the skills and all of that, just remember they got hundreds of resumes to go through. Keep it go chronological, but try to highlight on the top what matches. And I would also consider a resume that's somewhat more flexible, where when you see the job posting, I mean, because what'll happen is when we're looking at hundreds, we're looking for keywords or statements or experiences. And the easier we can see that, and the more that it jumps out, the faster, the more likelihood you're going to hold on to that resume in the pile to be considered to do it that way. So I would second that.
Yeah, you make a good point there, John, because you think of the mindset of a recruiter and what they're actually doing when they're looking at tens and dozens and hundreds of resumes. Um, most resumes are written in reverse chronological format, and that kind of pattern is fairly common. It's very common. And if you deviate, using that as an example, if you deviate from the typical pattern, it 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 can be a pattern, sort of a pattern interrupt, but for me, it's more of an annoyance, right? It's like, oh, now I need to reorient myself here, and that's not really a positive thing. Like, there's some positive pattern interrupts that leave a good impression. Having a weird resume that's, just completely out of the norm is not necessarily, it's not really a good thing the way I see it. You might have other recruiters that, oh, it actually leaves an impression, but for me, it doesn't. So yeah, I wouldn't go crazy and like flip it and make it, chronological or do anything like that. Even double column is quite annoying to me as a recruiter. Um, so just that perspective.
Yeah,
Um,
if it's not relevant experience, just don't put as much in there. I mean, we'll know when you see a stack of chronological experiences, if something's not relevant, it's generally going to be shorter, more concise, and not as much information because it's not really relevant. As long as they know what it is, they're going to focus on the things. And that's one way to use your space efficiently,
yeah.
is that if there's a job behind it that's more relevant and it's got more information, it'll stand out more if you do it that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't need to add more, right? Sometimes less is more. Because if it's not helping, it's effectively detracting because it's obscuring from the real stuff that you want the person to see and read. Um, this is a random question. How do you take care of your emotional health during these difficult times? I'm a newbie. Uh, yeah. So right now, it's kind of an interesting time right now because there's a lot of folks, particularly in tech, that are struggling to find, their next role. There's a lot of companies that have downsized. Cost of capital and venture capital is not flowing like it did 2 years ago, right? What I'm seeing is there's a lot of companies that are they're focusing more, maybe a little less on growth and more on profitability. And so yeah, these are interesting times right now. And so you have to riding that roller coaster of the job search it can be challenging. So in terms of like taking care of emotional health, what I would recommend is doing things that help you sort of maintain, sustain, and even develop your confidence, right? If you're doing is a job search and you're just getting you're banging your head against the wall and getting a bunch of rejections, it can be quite demotivating. Um, and they say that, looking for a full-time job is a full-time job, but I would make some time for any passion projects, particularly if they sort of align with your profession, right? You could do volunteer or side projects. You could learn something new. You could develop, take some courses. There's so much free content out there. And so, part of it is not just, taking courses and learning for the sake of learning, but if you can apply what you're learning into a project that you can somehow showcase on your resume, that would be interesting to me. We talked about gaps earlier, right? And if that's something that you can put some energy into, learn something new, sort of maintain your confidence, I think that would really help you sort of manage the ups and downs, that result from the job search.
Right?
Um,
I would reach out to somebody on this video and just make a connection with them and create a one-to-one relationship, talk to each other about what's going on. And in a way, that's sort of a helping each other kind of get through your struggles, sharing what's working for you, what's not working for you. Because you're all in the same I think you're all in the same situation, experiencing some of the same things. So it almost becomes sort of that support mechanism with someone who's experiencing the same things that you are too. Find networking groups.
Yeah, the Never Search Alone community is sort of built on this premise of, well, never search alone, right? That's the idea. Like there's others that are sort of in this similar boat as you, and you can sort of support each other. And so, if you're not taking advantage of the Never Search Alone community, and if here's one thing, you might not be matched with the right group. That happens. Um, and so, if you feel like that's the case, you should request a rematch. There's no harm, no foul. I think worst case scenario is you go into your group on a weekly or biweekly basis, just dragging your feet, and then nobody stands to gain from that kind of situation. Um, how do you navigate a toxic workplace while still interviewing and waiting a new role? Um, yeah, toxic workplaces, so that's the thing, right? Like when you're interviewing with a company, sort of interviewing for culture, right? And trying to get a feel for what the people are like there. Are they going to be people that you want to spend time with, respect, you can learn from, and so forth. Sometimes it's not always obvious, and it can creep up on you, and it might even be just isolated to a few individuals that you work closely with that might not be representative of the overarching company culture. But I guess, I mean, to this question, it's like, I would try to, maintain boundaries and sort of make sure that you are making sure that your needs are being met. The days, if you're working with a toxic boss, that could be a challenging situation. I guess my best advice would be just maintain boundaries and, meanwhile, putting energy into finding that next role. Quitting outright could be, if you could sustain that financially, that could be an option. But sometimes it, sometimes it's easier if you're employed, with respect to confidence, right? Like we were just talking about, to do the job search while you're employed. And so yeah, I mean, that's a decision you have to take on a case by case basis. But um, yeah. Um, let's see, we're about the bottom of the hour here. Let me see if there's any other questions here on the chat. Close the sale if there's any reason that they would not see you as a fit. Okay. Okay, Jeffrey's just giving some suggestions. Okay, well, I gotta run. We can pick up oh, actually, next week I am out. I'm traveling. So I'll probably either look at rescheduling for Wednesday or pushing to the following week. But I'll communicate with everyone via email. All right. Thank you guys for joining. Appreciate your time and your engagement, and I hope to see you either next week or the following week. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.